Welcome to today's deep dive analysis. We are opening the case file on one of history's most fascinating, complex, and quite frankly terrifying figures, Alauddin Khilji. We're looking at a man whose obsession with absolute power drove him to create an empire where literally not a single leaf could fall without his permission. This is going to be a gripping look at the mechanics of total control, blinding ambition, and absolute ruthlessness. Let's jump right in.
Imagine walking into a bustling medieval market. A merchant tries to cheat you, right? Just shorting the weight of your meat by a few ounces. Well, under this ruler's law, the punishment wasn't a fine or a slap on the wrist. No, the exact missing weight of that product was sliced directly from the merchant's own flesh. It's brutal, I know, but this wasn't just casual cruelty. It was a chillingly calculated system designed to inject absolute terror and compliance into everyday life. So who exactly was this man?
Okay, let's dive into this historical context to understand exactly how a ruler like this is forged. We start with Muhammad Ghori conquering India, which kicks off a massive 700-year era of Muslim rule. Following his death, his former slave actually forms the Mamluk Sultanate. Over time, that empire weakens, and amidst the looming, terrifying threat of Mongol invasions, a military man named Alauddin seizes power as the new Sultan of Delhi. Now here is where our story really begins. Alauddin had raised his young nephew, a boy named Alauddin Khilji. He even married his own daughter to him, bringing young Alauddin right into the beating heart of the royal family.
But life at the top wasn't exactly a fairy tale. There's a really sharp psychological contrast in Alauddin's early life. At home, he was a humiliated husband. He was mocked relentlessly by his royal wife, who constantly reminded him that he was essentially a nobody with zero wealth or real status compared to her. To escape that toxic environment, he transformed himself into an incredibly ambitious commander. Driven by this deep personal disrespect, Alauddin threw himself entirely into the military. He fought with astonishing bravery on the front lines to crush a local rebellion, earning himself the title of Governor of Kara. But, he was still broke. He was desperate for real power. And that desperation led him to launch a massive, completely unauthorized raid on a neighboring province, literally just to steal their gold.
Well, when Sultan Jalaluddin found out about this rogue raid, he marched a massive army toward his nephew. Alauddin knew he was caught red-handed, so he orchestrated a brilliant, stone-cold trap. First, the fake apology. He sent his brother to the Sultan, claiming he was so deeply ashamed he would actually commit suicide if his uncle didn't forgive him. And it worked. That leads to step 2, the vulnerable hug. The Sultan actually leaves his army behind, takes a small boat, and goes to embrace his weeping nephew. And finally, the betrayal. In that exact vulnerable moment, Alauddin's soldiers strike. They assassinate the Sultan, behead him, and parade the severed head around on a spear to spread sheer terror. Just like that, Alauddin violently stole the throne.
But here's the thing. Calling yourself Sultan and actually controlling the capital of Delhi are two very, very different things. The people absolutely hated him for murdering his uncle. To solve this PR nightmare, Alauddin marches on Delhi, and along the way he makes an unprecedented offer. Anyone who joins his rebel army gets a full year's salary paid entirely in advance. I mean, think about the sheer logistical madness of this. He was essentially writing blank checks to arm a massive fighting force before he even controlled the state treasury. Yet because of this incredible financial incentive, his army rapidly swells to an astounding 100,000 plus troops before he even reaches the city gates.
And that massive gamble sets up one of the most theatrical political maneuvers in all of history. When Alauddin finally arrives at Delhi, he doesn't lay a bloody siege. Nope. Instead, he loads massive catapults and cannons with all that stolen gold from his raids and literally fires gold coins right into the city streets. It rained gold in Delhi. It's insane, right? But this staggering display of wealth worked instantly. The citizens and the local army quickly, conveniently forgot all about the murdered Sultan, and Alauddin secured his absolute control over the capital.
But the celebrations didn't last long at all, because Alauddin immediately faced his first true existential crisis, the Mongols. The world's undisputed superpower was marching directly toward India. To survive this, Alauddin completely revolutionized his military. He created India's very first permanent standing army that was paid strictly in cash. He enforced strict merit-based recruitment, and to stop soldiers from committing fraud, like sharing horses or swapping identities, he mandated that detailed facial descriptions be recorded. He even had horses branded with unique marks. It's honestly mind-blowing to see a system functioning exactly like modern license plates being rolled out all the way back in the 13th century.
Because of these highly structured, modernized recruitment systems, the size of the army he was able to build was just staggering. We're talking 500,000 troops rallying to form an iron wall around Delhi. Just pause and picture the mind-boggling scale of this operation. 500,000 soldiers in the medieval era. That meant he had to constantly feed, equip, manage, and pay a veritable sea of humanity just to keep his capital from falling. But they stood completely prepared to face down the Mongol threat.
When these two massive armies finally clashed, the tension must have been completely suffocating. Alauddin placed his best, most loyal general, Zafar Khan, on the flank. Zafar fought so fiercely that the Mongols actually appeared to break and retreat in terror. So, Zafar chases them down at full speed. He pushes further and further, totally ignoring his standing orders to hold the line. But the Mongols hadn't broken at all. They were absolute masters of the deceptive retreat. Suddenly they stop, turn around, and Zafar Khan realizes he's been lured miles away from his main force. He is completely surrounded.
Back at the main camp, commanders are begging Alauddin to send reinforcements to save Zafar Khan. But Alauddin coldly refuses. He delivers a line that really defines his entire reign. "I do not help those who act without my orders." He impartially, ruthlessly allowed his absolute best general to die, simply to enforce supreme discipline within his ranks. Now, knowing he was totally doomed, Zafar Khan fought with such ferocity that he actually fatally wounded the Mongol commander before dying himself. It was a blow so severe that the Mongols abandoned the entire invasion and retreated.
With the Mongols gone, Alauddin was left with a new massive problem, a 500,000-man army that he now had to afford. His solution? A radically extreme economic shift. Imagine a ruler today unilaterally freezing the price of everything from a sports car to a loaf of bread. Well, that's exactly what he did. He fixed the price of absolutely everything in the market, from war horses all the way down to simple sewing needles. He built huge government granaries and forced all merchants to buy their goods exclusively from the state at fixed rates. By artificially driving down the cost of living this way, even his lowest paid soldiers could afford a really comfortable life.
And this brilliantly illustrates how he maintained that control. To enforce an impossible economic policy like that, he built a highly sophisticated three-tier intelligence web. First, you had market controllers in every single bazaar. Second, to make sure those controllers weren't corrupt, he had intelligence officers watching them. And third, to make sure everyone was honest, he deployed secret spies who just blended in as everyday shoppers. This heavily layered surveillance, operating exactly like modern intelligence agencies, is what actually enforced that terrifying flesh-for-flesh rule we talked about earlier. Everyone was constantly terrified that the random person they were selling to might be one of the Sultan's secret spies.
Now, you'd think nobody in their right mind would dare speak out against a man who literally chops flesh off people for cheating. But one day, a group of bleeding, battered merchants arrives at the palace. They had just been robbed and their families kidnapped by bandits, right outside the gates of Delhi. They marched up and directly challenged Alauddin's massive ego, asking him, "How can you call yourself Alexander II when we aren't even safe at your gates?"
Alauddin didn't argue with them. Instead, he acted with swift, terrifying brutality. He immediately deployed his army to chop down the entire forest surrounding Delhi where these bandits hid out. They hunted down 3,000 bandits, beheaded every single one of them, and then hung their bodies along the roads for everyone to see. A gruesome, unmistakable warning.
To ensure something like this literally never happened again, he rolled out terrifying new enforcement laws. Checkposts were built every 10 miles. Police officers were held personally and financially liable for any crime that happened in their district. And if they failed to provide justice, or if they took a bribe, they were publicly shamed and skinned alive. The result of this absolute terror? Crime effectively vanished. It was actually said that a woman could walk down a deserted, dark road with a basket of gold on her head and no one would even dare look at her.
So after all this brutal control, how did a rebellion still manage to strike the Sultan? Well, despite a massive army, strict price controls, thousands of spies, and a completely pacified countryside, danger was lurking close to home. While on a hunting trip, Alauddin became separated from his royal guards. Out of nowhere, a barrage of arrows rained down on him, fired by his own nephew who wanted the throne for himself. The nephew actually thought Alauddin was dead and rushed back to claim power, but back at the rocks, the wounded Sultan slowly raised his bloody hand. It was a dramatic, chilling proof that he had survived the ambush.
As you can imagine, this assassination attempt triggered supreme paranoia in Alauddin. He demanded his spies tell him exactly why people rebelled in the first place. Based on their intel, he launched 3 extreme social reforms to crush any future dissent. First, he banned alcohol entirely to stop people from gathering and plotting. So much liquor was dumped that the streets of Delhi literally turned into rivers of mud. It was an absolute medieval prohibition. Second, he ended prostitution and mandated ridiculously harsh punishments, like castration for adultery. And third, he recognized that elite families gained power by marrying into each other. So he simply outlawed all royal marriages, parties, and gatherings without his explicit written permission.
This final layer of intelligence penetrated so deeply into private family life that it actually birthed a local legend. The surveillance web was so inescapable, citizens genuinely believed Alauddin commended jinns, supernatural demons, who literally hovered in their living rooms, listening to their private whispers. This absolute, terrifying authoritarian control thoroughly pacified his entire empire at home, and it's exactly what finally gave him the supreme stability he needed to turn his massive army southward and successfully conquer South India.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. As we've seen today, his methods were unquestionably brutal, paranoid, and often horrific. Yet those exact same methods repelled the Mongol superpower, basically eradicated crime, and forged an unprecedented economy and military structure. So was he simply a cruel, sadistic tyrant, or was he the most ruthlessly effective empire builder in human history? It's a fascinating paradox that leaves us with a whole lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive analysis, and keep questioning the history you think you know.